A Traveller's Guide to the Forgotten Realms, Episode 7, The Mountain Toes Gold Mine and the Grey Wolf Tribe. My dear Lord Sandrier, Gundren said that glory, honour and riches await us on the morning we left Phandalin. I'm starting to think he might be right. We are one step closer to our goal. On a separate note, I always thought that the term scared stiff was just an expression, but it turns out that it's true. One can actually be scared rigid. 2 days picking through the mountain trails and long derelict roads of the Sword Mountains brought us down to the Mountain's Toe gold mine. It is an apt name for a curious, ugly outcropping that protrudes from the mountainside into the foothills. The morning was warm, and the rain came in so hard that Gundren, Thardan and I went on foot toward the mine, while Nundro remained, sheltering the donkey in a cave. Gundren explained what he knew of the history of the place as we walked, gratefully protected from the rain by a spell cast by Thardan, usually used for carrying large amounts of baggage. The Mountain's Toe is small, but potentially very wealthy, founded a few decades before the collapse of the region, and occupied only intermittently since then by a variety of people, clans, organisations and companies. It was subject to a major series of actions of law in Neverwinter and Waterdeep a century ago by dwarves claiming to be the descendants of those that occupied Wave Echo Cave. To cut an awfully long and meandering story short, the dwarves were awarded rights to the mine on the proviso that an organisation that had made a huge investment in bringing it back into operation receive a portion of the profits. As such, a new company was established to exploit its potential wealth, based in Neverwinter. Things, however, have not been plain sailing. It really does seem that the whole region is cursed. We walked down toward the mine and were greeted by a pair of workers sitting under a lean-to, passing a bottle of brandy between them. The first to speak, a human not much taller than a dwarf, barrel-chested and shaven-headed, raised a hand to us. He introduced himself as Raylan, and his companion, a shield dwarf well into his cups, as Tarek Greenshale. They both spoke in Shanaton, the language of the northern dwarves, which is, apparently frequently the default tongue of mining in general, due to the abundance of extra words it has to more precisely describe what is needed or meant in that realm. "Not much to see here," he said. "Just a little mine, undercrewed and badly worked." That turned out to be true enough. The place was resident to 16 miners, mostly unmotivated and lacking a foreman or overseer for more than 10 days since the last had gone and buggered off with some traders that had passed through. Thardan dried us off with a spell, which wowed Raylan and Tarek, who showed us inside through the western entrance when the rain eased off for a while. As we stepped inside, I noticed Gundren looking around disgusted. "What in the nine hells happened here?" he asked. Tarek shrugged and belched. "I don't know. Places are midden. Deposits are rich enough, but we don't have supplies or crew enough to do more than scratch the surface. Those who came before us were very messy." We were shown through to a makeshift guard post, where a pair of bored but dangerous-looking humans, wearing sharp and well-made leather armour, were playing a game of 3 Dragon Ante. They introduced themselves as Marin and Orsa, but sullenly returned to their game when we made it clear that we were neither there to relieve nor resupply them. "Bloody caravan's more than a 10-day late already," Raylan explained, taking our coats and hanging them on pegs driven into a thin crack running along the wall. "We've already got our quota ready to ship out, but no one's come for it." Thardan barked an incredulous laugh. "Imagine Neverwinter not wanting gold. Perhaps they've been waylaid?" Raylan shrugged. "No answer for you. I reckon they've fallen afoul of the dragon." That was enough to prick everyone's ears up. Dragons are not rare in the world, far from it, but he referred to the dragon, which suggested something new and important. He proceeded to tell us all he knew about a new ice worm that had moved into the mountain range, about a 10-day ago, disrupting all manner of well-established and settled peoples and creatures. We even saw a manticore flying about the other day. Apparently, we'd been particularly fortunate, having been occupied as we had clearing out the old holdfast, as we had been sufficiently off any beaten track as to avoid notice or tripping over displaced orcs. There's a couple of local orc tribes nearby. We see them from time to time. They're all small fry. Don't bother us, don't bother them, you know. Well, they've been on a move of late. One in particular, all wear bear pelts and furs and call themselves the Ice Spire clan, have been down here. Apparently the dragon landed up there and ate their chief, and his best, so they've all fled, looking for somewhere new to set up. They were based at the top of Ice Spire, the biggest mountain, in the old hold. Some gnomes had come through the area a few days earlier to trade, reporting that travellers on the tribal had been attacked by orcs, and a few of the more capable groups had seen the dragon passing overhead, hunting. I find myself fearful for Phandalin. Iceworms, white dragons, are the smallest, most ferocious, and least intelligent of the most common species of dragon in Falrien, for better or worse. They aren't given to planning, preferring direct strikes and raids to fill their lairs with diamonds, their favourite type of treasure, and frozen delicacies. They'll only eat frozen food. But nonetheless, they are lethal predators, and when they move into an area, almost guaranteed to be the most powerful thing for miles around, even young ones. Tharden and Gundren, however, have reassured me that the odds of any dragon attacking Phandalin out of the blue is quite slim. The high mountains are close to ideal territory for a white dragon, and the village is a significant distance from the highest peaks, and far from the most vulnerable location in the region. According to Tharden, due to the nature and the habits of dragons, the territory seized by this newcomer will probably overlap or even be completely encompassed by that of several other dragons, many much larger, older, and more powerful. Supposedly, when the iceworm comes to the attention of or behaves in such a way as to anger those in whose territory it lives, they will take some kind of action to ensure the stability of their lands. It is also entirely likely that one lives fairly close to Phandalin already, maybe even remembering it during its heyday, and has taken an interest in its continuation. This makes me a little more comfortable, but not much. I find myself thinking of little Pip Stonehill and Carp Alderleaf and my brother. Raylan explained our purpose to the guards who let us into the mine proper. I confess that I'm not particularly familiar with gold mines, or any mines for that matter, so didn't know what to expect from the place. But Gundren seemed disgusted. There was a distinct split personality to the place that I noticed later. The oldest corridors, and the very newest, are about 5 feet across and 8 tall, all orderly and carefully cut with regularly spaced supports. A lot of the intermediate work, however, is rough, lower, narrower, and utilitarian. In short, Gundren seems to object to the place on the grounds that it is insufficiently neat and tidy, and that there is a distinctly irrational approach to how many of the more recent branches have been started and maintained. I couldn't tell a great deal of difference personally. It is essentially not up to his exacting standards, but he is concerned with the long term, always talking in terms of centuries and millennia, while the company in the mine is strictly a business venture. That, and the work done most recently by the current crews, is at least acceptable to him. We were shown through winding corridors and a number of awkwardly constructed gates to the vacant overseer's office. It is a good-sized space, clearly very old and dwarf-cut into the rock, but equipped with a modern office, desk, wall charts, and cot. In the corner lay a chest with the insignia of the company. Gundren found the maps he sought in the chest and laid them out on the desk. Copies of the originals, Tharden told me, indicating a number of runes across the bottom edge, suggesting that they were 7th generation maps. They spent some time poring over them, making comparisons to Gundren's own of the region, weighing their options until they fell silent and looked at me. "I think we have it," Gundren said. Tharden nodded and grinned. They quickly tidied up and thanked Raylan, as Tharden pressed a platinum piece into his hand, and we left via a different route, or through increasingly unpleasant corridors until winding down a steep, narrow passage, emerging on the east side of the toe in the driving rain. There, the brothers took deep breaths, and both said quiet prayers to Moradin and Dumathoin, while I sent one to Suni for allowing me to step out into the clear air, before Tharden sent a magic sending message to Nundro to meet us on the way. And they were off. Gundren was giddy with excitement as he oriented himself, and was almost jogging up the slopes in search of long-forgotten pathways. Tharden, who is much easier to talk to whenever Gundren is hyper-focused, explained that the maps quite clearly describe the route that they should take, and that we should be on the lookout for certain distinct landmarks in the features of the mountains themselves. We would know that we were close when we saw small holes in the mountainside which issued forth steam. Something to do with the name of Wave Echo Cave, which seems so strange to have in the mid-mountains. We walked in the pouring rain for several more hours, met Nundro and our baggage, and continued after a brief lunch under a rocky outcropping, where Tharden once again was kind enough to dry out our sodden clothes. On the road once more, we paused a few hours before dusk and sought a place to rest. We found a fortuitous spring and started to make camp. I walked to the tree line to make water, and there my piss literally stopped mid-stream with terror, as a face, painted with mud, hair slicked back and teeth filed to points emerged from the darkness. I heard a twig snap to my right, made to cry out, and the world went dark. I woke after sunset, tied to a tree to find the rain replaced with a heavy, wet fog, my head pounding. I was insensible for some time, at one point thinking I watched wolves dance around a fire, then the mountains rising and falling like waves on the shore in a storm. Eventually, I made out Tharden, sat opposite a tall, thin man with jet black hair and hard blue eyes, a campfire between them, spitting. His skin was a weather-beaten brown, and he wore leather clothes trimmed with fur against the mountain cold. That's when I noticed Gundren tied to a tree at the opposite side of the camp, and 15 young men and women, some little more than children, maintaining a respectful distance from the fire. Gundren was awake, but gagged, where I wasn't, and he had a bloody nose that even at 30 feet I could tell was broken. There was movement on the very edges of the site, and I made out occasional flashes of bright eyes and the sleek grey shapes of wolves slinking around. I feared for my life a few times since leaving Neverwinter, but at that moment I thought I was truly done for. Tharden was talking to the man beside the fire who had a long steel-headed spear laid across his knees. For a while I thought I was concussed and not hearing clearly, until I realised that they were speaking some strange dialect of Iluskan. We'd spent the whole of our journey speaking the Dwarvish tongue, so their words took a few moments to sink into my head. Having grown up speaking Chondathan in the Heartlands, Iluskan was a third tongue to me after Elvish. This had the right kind of inflections and structure, but most of the words were completely foreign to me, and I do speak an entirely unreasonable number of languages. Tharden and the man were speaking animatedly, with lots of hand-waving and chopping. At one point, around the time I started to lose feeling in my hands, the man spat into the fire, and I thought we were going to end up as dinner for some barbarian feast. But a moment later, the pair stood and shook hands. Suddenly my bonds were released, and I fell to the floor, pain flooding into my limbs. Nundro fell to the side of me as well, and spat out his gag. "Damned God!" He coughed under his breath, rolling over and rubbing his aching legs. I did the same, wincing as sensation returned. I was pulled to my feet by the same person that I'd seen when I lost consciousness. It was a woman. She was beautiful in a rugged, travel-stained fashion, and the filed teeth certainly were an interesting look. She spoke to me in that strange dialect, and I was only able to pick up the words share, tonight, and furs with any certainty. I turned to Tharden, who was speaking with Nundro and Gundren as they beckoned me over. He looked terrible, stressed and sweaty, as he explained that they were an Utgard hunting party, out training young adults in controlling their power. This was all totally foreign to me. I of course knew that there were barbarian tribes all over the realms, people who hadn't discovered or chose to live without what we call civilization. "What? Who?" I asked, staring all around at the tall, lean and somewhat feral humans all about me. Each one had the same black hair and some variation on blue eyes. Before Nundro could reply, the tall man appeared, standing next to Tharden. "Friend Falrien," Tharden said, in Shanaton, with feigned happiness cuffing again at his sweaty brow. "It is my pleasure to introduce Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback." The man recognised his name and nodded slowly to me. I repeated the gesture and he softened somewhat. "Do they speak Iluskan?" I asked, cautiously and still in the dwarf tongue. "Some might. Be careful. Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback is the high tester of the youth for this local branch of the Grey Wolf tribe, of the people of the Utgard. I've explained to him that we are explorers, and you are a warrior of great renown in the service of a goddess with flames for hair." That was news to me. I was and am a failed acolyte in the Church of Suni. My tongue, already parched in an over-dry mouth, sought to adhere itself thoroughly to my palate. I had heard of them. Everyone has. A tribe of barbarians divided into different sects, each worshipping a different ancestor spirit, that, in this case, the Grey Wolf tribe, as one, transform into werewolves beneath the full moon, that rampage and hunt everything living that takes their fancy. They, in many ways, are one of the monsters that people tell their children about in order to make them go to sleep at night. Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback was massive and weirdly still, like a snake ready to strike. I shifted into Iluskan and bowed deeply, hoping he would understand. "Greetings, Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback." I changed speaking to Iluskan, hoping he would understand, and bowed deeply. "Greetings, Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback. I'm pleased to meet you. May you walk in Suni's love and the glory of Uthgar himself." It seemed that history and theology were not lost on me. Uthgar was, millennia ago, a mortal man who rose to such personal and political power, leading vast tribes, that they started to venerate him as their god. When he died, their worship of him was strong enough that Lord Ao himself took note, and raised him to the rank of a true divine power with the support and sponsorship of the god of battle, Tempest. The Utgard are sufficiently numerous now that their god remains a power in his own right, despite having almost no worshippers outside of their culture. Grey Bor Finramian ap Steelback clearly didn't grasp all of my words, but enough came through that he offered an enormous hand for me to shake. I am not a small man, at a shade over 6 feet, but he towered over me, easily 7 feet, and his hand wrapped all around mine, swallowing it. His skin was hot, almost febrile, and he gave off an aura of undeniable menace, so strong that had he so much sneered at me, I fear my heart may have stopped in my chest. He spoke, with me only grasping a handful of words again, before turning around and returning to shout orders at his people. Tharden took Gundren, myself and Nundro further to one side. "Gods be good, but I thought we were done for there," Tharden said, cuffing at his brow again. Gundren was plainly furious, but making a good show of maintaining his normal happy-go-lucky demeanour. "What the—" Tharden interrupted, shaking his head. "I cast the tongue spell on myself and claimed to be in search of a powerful land, a long-lost dwarf-hold. After reassuring him that we do not mean to interrupt their hunting, and by being able to speak his tongue, he's agreed that we may share their ale and meat tonight. Apparently, they're returning to the rest of their tribe tomorrow," he said. Nundro asked how long it was until the full moon, and looked as relieved as I was when we realised that it was more than a 10-day away. After that, we were granted the hospitality of the Grey Wolf tribe, and I have never experienced anything like it before. A small deer and a big, old, leathery boar were brought forth from cook fires, along with skins of a fragrant, rough ale and fierce, well, whatever it was something similar to brandy. We were served huge, steaming slabs of bloody meat on long, sharp knives, and other than the dreadful ale, the fare was surprisingly good. After that, we were given a demonstration of the prowess of grey wolf hunters in the form of some kind of theatre. It was performed by a shaman or druid who took the form of an enormous wolf 7 feet at the shoulders, and a trio of youngsters who stalked the wolf for 3 years until just one of them survived. Eventually victorious, the last hunter returned to his people wearing the wolf's skin as a cloak, and was made their chieftain or king or similar. The language barrier made it hard to keep track, but it was enchanting. By that point, most of the party were ready to turn in for the night, either drunk or exhausted from their day spent hunting and competing with one another. Tharden informed us that the grey wolves were deeply suspicious of magic, so he wouldn't be creating one of his domes for our comfort. This saddened me more than I expected, and I realised that despite being out in the wilderness for as long as we had, the skills of the brothers Rockseeker had made the experience far more comfortable than it had any right to be. I unfurled my bedroll as close to the fire as I could, and made my spot as comfortable as possible, before heading into the bushes to answer a call of nature. I don't think I've ever felt as observed as I was then. When I returned, it was to a campsite almost asleep. I was about to climb into my bedroll when one of the oldest in the party, a young man of no more than 18 or 19 summers, but wearing all the regalia of a man, with a huge knotted scar on his neck and jaw, came over to me, the girl that had scared the piss out of me behind him. She was bundled in an enormous wolfskin, but had washed, and her black hair gleamed in the firelight. The young man gestured to me and spoke in heavily accented Iluskan. "Friend Falrien, this one is pleased to name himself to you as Ironclaw, Boar, Brightmoon, Ap Grey, Ap Steelback." We shook hands, and I was surprised again at the sheer size of these men. Ironclaw stood almost as tall as Grey, who I believe may have been his father, and they shared the same menacing bearing, but while the elder was still, Ironclaw was lithe and restive, never quite standing still. He gestured to the girl, who stepped forward into the firelight. With the mud washed from her face and hair, she was revealed to be quite pretty in a fierce, wild way. "This is Whisperwind, Boar, Brightmoon, Ap Grey, Ap Steelback, my sister. She has looked upon your face and heard the tales of your companions tell us of your bravery and skill at arms, and is impressed. She would lie with you this night." It was not a question, more of a statement. At that, she dropped the wolfskin. She was naked beneath it, and honestly, I almost lost the ability to think. I scarcely believed what I saw in the moment. The whole sight had gone silent, and all around me dozens of eyes stared at the pair of us, with her giant brother stood between. I wondered whether it was a trap of some kind, whether we were being tested for something. But she looked at me and smiled, which transformed her into the kind of beauty that would have been welcomed with open arms into the church of Lady Firehair. "I see that you appreciate my sister's beauty," he said, smiling. "She will take you to the places she has prepared." Then he continued to speak, but lapsed into their own language, a language that Tharden later informed me was called Bothi. Then, without speaking, she stepped up to me, and I realised she was a good 6.5 feet tall. She took me by the hand and drew me away from the fire. As we walked, I realised that she smelled of spice and rain and fire, and those gathered nearby, men and wolves, began to howl as we left the light. She was lean, lithe, and very pretty. As a gentleman, I will not discuss what happened after that, but in the morning she led me back to our camp and handed me a small pot of salve for my many scratches and a couple of bites that I think may have been harder than she had intended. Then she and her people left. 1 minute there were more than a dozen in the small clearing, then, seemingly in a handful of heartbeats, they had melted into the tree line and morning mists. The 4 of us remained there, stunned, for several minutes. Then Gundren turned to me and laughed, punching me on the arm, almost hard enough to knock me off my feet. "Congratulations, O mighty warrior of the fire-haired goddess," he jibed. Then the other brothers joined in while we gathered our own belongings together. It wasn't until my face was scarlet and the wagon packed up that Tharden became a little more serious. "Did she say anything to you? Did you share any tongue in common?" I almost laughed at that, thinking of the translation, but it is much less suggestive in Shanton, believe me. I responded that we did not speak a great deal, and he laughed. Tharden had talked with her brother over breakfast, however. "He hopes that you've given his sister a strong son. Apparently she desired to add your strength and beauty to the tribe, and thus considered it a sign from their god that you'd come to her at the right time for her body." Gundren barked a laugh at this, and bade the donkey start on our way. I remained in the back of the cart, silent for some time. Nundro was drowsing next to me, nursing a hideous hangover. "So, half-elf," he grumbled, "in all your adventuring and carousing, don't tell me you've never been used as breeding stock by a feral half-barbarian werewolf before?" I didn't, indeed couldn't, reply. That was about a day ago. It took me a few hours to regain the power of speech. Shortly after lunch, we were well into the mid-mountains, and Nundro spotted a vent of steam wafting up from a small crevice in the ground. We were on the proper path. I might feel able to broach the topic of the Grey Wolf tribe another time, perhaps. If you like this video, please like and comment so that I can know whether people are appreciating this content. Then subscribe and ring the bell to remain notified of new releases. Please have a look at fiverr.com/characterlaw if you would like a custom-made character, NPC, organisation or town creating, but if not, rest assured that I value each and every one of you viewing my videos. All hail Uthgar, the Battle Father. This is Law of the Law Lounge.